There is a question that most people never stop long enough to ask. And the ones who do ask it, they usually ask it too late, when the years have already passed, and what's left is a kind of quiet ache that has no name. The question is this: what are these years for? Not the early years, not the years of becoming, of proving, of learning how to survive in a world that was not designed with you in mind. Not the years of building something, a home, a family, a reputation, a life. Not even the long middle years, when most of a woman's energy belongs to everyone but herself. These years, the ones you are in right now, or the ones you feel approaching, not as a threat, but as a presence, something slow and inevitable, like the tide coming in on a quiet shore. Most women I have spoken with do not have an answer to that question, not a real one, not one that feels true in their chest when they say it out loud. And it is not their fault. No one told them there was a purpose to this season. No one sat them down when they were young and said, "One day you will enter a time that belongs entirely to you, and here is what it is for." Instead, they were told to rest, to slow down, to let the younger generation take over, to be grateful for what they had, to stop wanting so much, as if the final years of a woman's life were simply an afterthought, a closing parenthesis, a waiting room before some other door opens. But the elders, the women who had lived through everything, who had buried husbands and outlasted storms, and watched children leave and return and leave again, who had carried grief the way some people carry old photographs, always with them, worn soft at the edges. Those women had a very different answer, and it is not what you expect. It is not about rest. It is not about grandchildren, though grandchildren may be part of it. It is not about finally taking that trip you always said you would take. It is not about tying up loose ends or making peace or any of the other gentle phrases people use when they are too afraid to say what this season actually requires. What the elders said will take less than 20 minutes to hear, and it may take the rest of your life to fully live. Before we go further, I want to say something. The part of this that surprised me most, the part that the elders said most women never discover until it is almost too late, I am saving for near the end. Not to be dramatic, but because it requires everything else to be heard first. It is the kind of thing that, if you hear it too soon, before the ground has been prepared, it slides off you. It does not land. But I will tell you this much: it has nothing to do with giving. It has nothing to do with sacrifice or service or being of use. It has everything to do with something women were rarely allowed to do before. Something that, for most of a woman's life, was treated as selfish, as dangerous, as unnecessary. Hold that. We will get there. Let us begin with what the elders were clear these years are not for. Because before you can understand what something is, you often have to first clear away what it is not. Like the way you have to pull the old plants from a garden before the new ones can grow. Not because the old plants were bad, they served their time, but because they are finished now and the soil is needed for something else. These years are not for continuing to serve the same roles with a body and a spirit that have already given everything they had to give. There is a kind of woman, and perhaps you have seen her, or perhaps you have been her, who spends her later years doing exactly what she did in her earlier years, cooking for everyone, managing everyone's feelings, being available, being useful, being good, still shrinking herself to fit into rooms that were never really big enough for her. Still apologizing for taking up space, still waiting, quietly, for someone to notice everything she has done. The elders did not call this loyalty. They did not call it love, though love may have been what started it. They called it a habit that had outlived its season, a dress worn so long it had fused to the skin. And they said, the hardest thing for a woman to do in her later years is to stop performing the self she performed for everyone else and begin, finally, to inhabit the self that was always underneath. These years are not for waiting to be seen by people who have been looking past you for decades. One elder said something that stayed with me for a long time after she said it. She said, "A woman who spends her final years still hoping that the ones who overlooked her will finally turn around and truly see her. That is the saddest story I know. Not because she was not worth seeing. She was always worth seeing. But because she gave those years to a door that was never going to open. And the whole time, there were other doors, wide open, flooded with light. And she never walked through them because she was still standing at the wrong one. These years are not for carrying guilt about what was not done, what was not said, who was not saved, who was not loved well enough. Every woman I have ever spoken with of a certain age carries something like this. A list, sometimes short, sometimes very long, of the places where she believes she fell short. The moments she did not show up the way she wished she had. The words she said that she cannot take back. The words she did not say and now cannot say. The choices she made when she was younger, more frightened, less wise. The elders were not dismissive of this. They did not say, "Forget it, it doesn't matter." They understood that the things we carry are real and that they are heavy for a reason. But they also said, there is a difference between accounting for your life and being imprisoned by it. And many women, without realizing it, have built a cell out of their own regrets and have been living inside it for years. These years are not for that. So, what are they for? I want to share that now. And I am going to ask you to hold what comes next gently, the way you would hold something fragile or something you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. Because for some women, what the elders say will feel like the first time in their lives they have been given permission. And permission, when it arrives after a long absence, can be almost overwhelming. The first answer the elders gave was this: these years are for transmission. Not transmission the way we sometimes think of it. Lectures, lessons, advice given to people who did not ask for it. Not the grandmother who tells her grandchildren what they are doing wrong. Not the woman at the gathering who has opinions about everything and shares all of them. Real transmission is quieter than that. It is almost invisible. The elders described it this way: a woman who has lived long and lived fully carries within her a kind of knowledge that does not have words yet. The young do not have language for it because they have not lived enough to need the language. But when an elder woman walks into a room, when she sits down, when she is simply present, something is transmitted that cannot be taught in any other way. It is transmitted through the way she holds her body, through the way she does not rush, through the way she listens, not to respond, not to fix, but to genuinely receive what is being said, through the way she has made peace with certain things that younger people are still fighting against. A woman who has lost people and continued to love knows something about love that someone who has never lost cannot access yet. A woman who has been afraid and acted anyway knows something about courage that has no textbook equivalent. A woman who has survived the thing she was most afraid of knows something about the limits of fear that changes the air around her. The young absorb this, not consciously, not in the way they would absorb information from a screen, but it enters them the way light enters a room, through every crack, from every angle, without announcement. One elder said, "I used to think my job was to tell people things. Now I know my job is to be something. And that is a much harder job and a much more important one. This is the first thing these years are for, not explaining what you know, being what you have become. And there is a responsibility in this that is not small, because a woman who has spent her later years contracted, apologetic, diminished, she transmits that too. The women around her learn, without being told, that this is what age looks like for a woman. This is what she becomes: smaller, quieter, less. And the women who have expanded into these years, who have become more fully themselves, who have stopped performing and started inhabiting, they transmit something entirely different. They change what is possible for the women watching them. This is not a small thing. This may be the most important thing. The second thing the elders said these years are for is forgiveness. And I want to be careful here, because the word forgiveness has been used against women for a very long time. It has been used to tell them to be quiet, to accept things they should not have had to accept, to release people from consequences they had not earned release from. That is not what the elders were talking about. They were talking about something much more personal, much more radical. They were talking about the forgiveness that happens inside a woman's own body, when she finally puts down the weight of everything she has been carrying, not because those things were not real, not because the people who hurt her did not hurt her, but because she has been carrying it long enough, and it is time. One elder described it this way. She said, "When I was young, I thought forgiveness was a gift you gave to the person who wronged you. I spent years not forgiving people because I did not want to give them a gift they did not deserve. And then someone older than me said, 'What if it is not a gift you give to them? What if it is a weight you drop for yourself?' And I thought about all the things I was still carrying, all the people I was still angry at, all the wounds I was still tending, all the old stories I was still telling myself. And I realized that I had been carrying all of it for decades, and not one of those people had spent a single day carrying it with me. The women who had moved through genuine forgiveness in their later years described something physical, a lightness in the body, a release in the chest, not happiness exactly, not even peace at first, more like space, like a room that had been full of furniture for years, and then one day the furniture was gone and you could move again. This is not the same as forgetting. The elders were very clear about this. Forgiveness does not require amnesia. You can know exactly what happened, remember every detail, and still choose to stop being organized around it. You can refuse to let the event or the person continue to rent space inside you. One woman said, "I forgave my mother in my 70s, not because she deserved it. She had been dead for 15 years, but I realized that I had been carrying a version of her inside me that still had power over how I felt about myself. And I was tired. I was so tired of being a daughter to a woman who was no longer even alive. So I put her down. Not her memory, her power. And that took everything I had. And it was the freest I had ever felt. These years are for that kind of freedom. The kind that does not ask for anyone's participation. The kind that only you can give to yourself. And now we arrive at the part I said I would save. The part the elders said most women never discover until it is almost too late. The part that, when I first heard it, did not sound like wisdom. It sounded almost too simple. It sounded like something a self-help book would say. And then I sat with it for a while. And I understood why the elders saved it for last. Because it is not simple at all. It is, for most women, the most difficult thing they will ever do. The elders said, the last years of a woman's life are for finally discovering what she wants, not what her children need, not what her husband preferred, not what her community would approve of, not what is responsible or reasonable or appropriate for a woman her age, not what she should want, based on everything she was told about who she was supposed to be. What she wants. For many women, and perhaps you are one of them, this question lands in a very uncomfortable place, because the honest answer is, I don't know. I have spent so long wanting things for other people, so long shaping my own wants around what was possible, what was permitted, what would not cause problems, that I am not sure I can tell anymore what I actually want versus what I have been told to want. The elders said this is normal. This is the inheritance most women carry. They were taught from the very beginning that their wants were secondary, that a good woman was one who subordinated her desires to the needs of those around her, that wanting something for yourself, something that did not benefit anyone else, something that was purely, selfishly yours, was a character flaw, a sign of immaturity, something to grow out of. And so most women grew out of it, or they learned to want in secret, or they learned to frame their wants as things that would benefit others. I want to travel so that I can broaden my perspective and be a better grandmother. Always the addendum, always the justification, always the permission slip written in someone else's name. One elder looked at me and said something I have not stopped thinking about since she said it. She said, "Do you know what the greatest gift of old age is for a woman? It is finally being allowed to want something for herself, without apology, without explanation, without asking anyone's permission." She paused. Most women discover this far too late, she said. They spend the last years of their lives still asking, still waiting, still shrinking, and then one day they cannot ask anymore, and it is over, and they never found out what they wanted. She looked at me steadily. "You don't have to wait that long," she said. "You never had to wait at all." I want to sit with that for a moment, because it deserves the space. What do you want? Not what do you think you should want. Not what would be good for everyone. Not what is realistic given your circumstances. Not what you would have wanted 20 years ago if things had been different. Right now, in this body, in this season, with everything you know and everything you have survived and everything you have become. What do you want? For some women, this question is immediately followed by anxiety, by the feeling that wanting something for yourself is dangerous, that it invites punishment or disappointment or the judgment of people who have depended on your selflessness for decades. The elders knew this feeling. Several of them described it exactly, and they said, that feeling is the last thing that needs forgiving, the fear of your own wanting, The belief that your desires are somehow too much, too inconvenient, too late. That belief was installed in you. It was not born in you. And part of what these years are for is the slow, patient work of uninstalling it. The women the elders pointed to, the ones who had arrived at these final years and found them genuinely beautiful, genuinely alive, they did not all look the same. They did not all have the same stories, the same families, the same losses, the same paths. But they shared something. They had stopped performing. They had stopped performing youth, performing usefulness, performing the version of themselves that others had come to expect. They were not trying to be relevant in the way they had been relevant before. They were not trying to compete with younger women, or prove that age had not diminished them, or demonstrate that they still had value by conventional measures. They had simply become very fully themselves. And this, the elders said, is the work of the final years. It is not passive. It is not about waiting for the work to end. It is the most active, the most demanding, the most courageous work a woman ever does. Because every other work had external scaffolding, a role to fill, a person to care for, a task with a clear completion point. This work has none of that. It is just you, and the question of who you are when you are no longer performing anything for anyone. Some women find that terrifying. The elders said, good, that is where it starts. Because the women who never felt the terror were the ones who never really went through the door. They stayed at the edge of it, kept themselves busy enough not to feel the vertigo, and called it contentment. And there is nothing wrong with contentment, but it is not the same as arrival. The women who arrived, they felt the fear, and they went through anyway. And on the other side, they found something they described again and again in very similar language. They found themselves, not a new self, not a transformed self, the self that had always been there, under everything, under the roles and the performances and the habits and the fears, waiting with extraordinary patience for the moment when everything else fell away and it could finally come forward. This is the last beautiful thing the elders said these years are for. They are for coming home to yourself, not after everything is finished, not after everyone else's needs have been met, not as a reward for a life well lived, but now, in this season, in this body, with this much time left. I want to close with something one elder said that I have returned to many times. She was very old when I spoke with her. She moved slowly, and her hands were folded in her lap, and she had the quality that certain very old people have, of being completely, utterly present, as if her life had taught her that this moment was the only one that mattered, and she had finally, after everything, believed it. She said, "The last years of a woman's life are not the end of the story. They are not the closing chapter. They are the room she spent her whole life walking toward, the one where everything she is actually lives, unguarded, without performance. Most women don't know it is there until they are already in it. Some never find it at all, but it has always been there, and the door has always been open." She looked out the window for a moment. "The sad thing," she said, "is not that women arrive late. It is that they were told, their whole lives, that the room did not exist, that there was no room for them that was not also for someone else, that to want a room of your own, a self of your own, was somehow a betrayal." She turned back to me. "It was never a betrayal," she said. "It was always your inheritance. So I want to ask you, and I want you to answer not in your head, but somewhere more honest than your head. What is one thing you have been waiting for permission to want? Not a thing you will eventually get around to. Not a thing that needs to wait until circumstances are different, until people need you less, until you have earned the right to it. One thing, real, specific, yours, that you have been carrying quietly, telling yourself it is not the right time, telling yourself other people's needs come first, telling yourself maybe later, maybe when things settle down, maybe someday. Write it in the comments. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to justify it. You do not need to ask anyone's permission. Just write it. Because one of the things the elders understood that the rest of us are still learning is this. The act of naming what you want, even in a small comment on a video, even with no one watching, is not a small act. It is the beginning of believing that you are allowed to have it. And you are. You always were.